go. Hi, everyone. I am Sean Gio. I'm the policy director of the Partnership for Strong Communities, and we're moving on to our next session in this year's Connecticut Affordable Housing Conference. Give me 1 second. Of course, must be the end of the conference. I'm starting to screw up everything. So we're on to our next breakout session, 4.1. Who's implementing your town's affordable housing plan? First, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping, a few items, and thank our leading sponsor, Connecticut Housing Finance Authority, our visionary sponsors, Connecticut Department of Housing and Wells Fargo, Bank of America, J.D. Amelia and Connecticut Associates, M&T Bank, Webster Bank, and Melville Charitable Trust. Thank you for your sponsorships. And Federal Home Loan Bank of Boston, Cohn Resnick, and Trinity Financial. And today we're going to hear from practitioners and folks that are doing the work of implementing our local affordable housing plans. Let me just get out of the share screen. Great, there we go. And so we're here with Melissa Capelmacy and Jocelyn Ayer, and I'll pass it on to Jocelyn Ayer now from the Litchfield County Center for Housing Opportunity.
Thanks, Sean. All right, let me see if I can get to. You guys see that? Great. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you all for being here. We are going to talk about affordable housing plan implementation, which is not the sexiest topic in the world unless you are planning nerds like me and Melissa and Sean. But we will make it interesting for you. And again, the goal with housing plan implementation is to get affordable housing built and on the ground more quickly than we are able to do it without implementing our housing plans. Our panelists today, I'm Jocelyn Ayer. I'm the director of the Litchfield County Center for Housing Opportunity. And we also have with us Melissa Capelmacy, who, when she agreed to be on the panel, was with the Regional Plan Association, was the vice president for state programs and also the Connecticut director. But she is now the chief initiative officer of the Centers for Housing Opportunity with the Housing Collective. So we're glad to have her here today. And then I believe Mike Santoro from the Connecticut Department of Housing is going to join us. He may be having some technical difficulties. So if that's the case, we will try to cover Mike's slides briefly as well. But I'm going to talk a little bit about how the municipalities in my region are kind of organizing themselves to make sure that their housing plans do get implemented. And give you a specific sort of case study example of one town in the region who's made a lot of progress on implementing their housing plan. Melissa's going to talk about some best practices in housing plan implementation. And then hopefully Michael will join us to talk about how the Connecticut Department of Housing plans to support municipalities as they implement their housing plans. And we'll have time for question and answers, maybe more time if Mike doesn't show up. So I just wanted to start by briefly talking about what we do at the Center for Housing Opportunity in Litchfield County. We're coordinating a regional response to housing affordability challenges. We work directly with municipalities in our region, nonprofit housing organizations, cross-sector partners like hospitals, arts and culture organizations, and also capacity building resource partners like the Department of Housing, LISC, and our community foundations that serve our area. Again, as you all know, everybody has their part to play in creating more housing opportunities. But sometimes it's challenging to sort of know what everyone else is doing and how to support everyone's efforts again, so we can kind of get more done more quickly. So that's what our mission is. And as a tiny bit of background, I did assist 18 municipalities in our region with their housing plans. And so we did quite a bit of talking during the planning process about how we were going to make sure that the plan got implemented once it was done. No one who was involved in the many, many months and many, many meetings that it takes to create an affordable housing plan and get it adopted. None of those folks want to see it just sit on a shelf for 5 years. Again, what we're going to talk about today is how to make sure that it doesn't just sit there collecting dust. And so the first thing I wanted to talk about is, what, entity within your community could spearhead or lead your town's housing plan implementation, and give you some examples. But first, I wanted to just see from those of you that are here today, who is leading housing plan implementation in your town. And if I can get my mouse to, or Sean or Melissa, are you able to launch the first? Let me see, maybe I can do it. Here we go. All right, so we have a poll question for you all, asking who is leading the implementation of your municipal affordable housing plan. Do you have a town or city housing commission or committee? Is your planning and zoning commission or just your planning commission implementing it? Is there city or town staff that are kind of the lead on this, or a task force, or is no one implementing your housing plan? So only 5 of you have responded. But I'm going to close it anyway. So those of you that did respond, I'll share the results here.
Jocelyn, I think the survey popped up and then went away very quickly for folks. Yeah.
Oh, let's try this. Relaunch. Oh, all the 5 people that responded before it, your answers went away. So there we go. Now we've got some more responses. So while people are answering, I guess I'll just share some examples again from towns in my region. Some of the towns do have a town housing commission or committee that's spearheading implementation. For example, in Salisbury, it's a Salisbury Affordable Housing Commission, and in the town of Washington, they also have a housing commission responsible for spearheading implementation. Some towns have created implementation committees, either peopled by volunteers or by town staff. In Cornwall, they created a housing plan implementation task force. And in the city of Torrington, they have an implementation team made up of staff members, including their economic development director, their city planner, and their blight enforcement officer. And in some communities that I've worked with, the local housing nonprofits are sort of informally spearheading implementation, because they are actually, usually there's a few projects within the housing plan that they are actually the ones that are following through with. So I'm going to end the poll and share the results with you. Can you see that, Melissa? Yeah, so, okay. So it looks like in about 40% of you respondents said that either town or city staff were kind of leading the implementation. And then 20% have a town housing committee or commission. 15% have a planning commission that's spearheading it. And 13%, there's no one. Let's see here. This table that's on the right of the slide is just, it is kind of an excerpt from one of the housing plans I worked with. But some of the strategies that we talked about in every community, we're having, again, this lead entity who's implementing the plan convene a quarterly meeting. It could even be an annual meeting, but a meeting of all of the entities within your town that have been tasked with some, strategy within your plan. So as, probably all of your housing plans have something for the zoning commission to do, something for the city council or the board of selectmen, something for the conservation commission, maybe even. And so getting a representative from each of those groups together, at least annually, to talk about whether they have worked on the strategy in the plan that they have been tasked with, we have found to be important and helpful in actually, again, continuing to make progress after you adopt the plan. Also, having an annual report go to, again, in a small town, either the board of selectmen, the city council. So there is some annual reporting on what progress you've made on implementing the plan. We know that these are 5-year plans, so you're not going to implement everything in the first year. But it's nice to have a way annually to say, here's what we did work on, and here's what we're going to work on next year. So we actually have a template for that all of our communities can use, which is a summary of all of the strategies in the plan, and then a section for which strategies have been worked on that year. It is good, and many of you probably have included at least a reference to your town's affordable housing plan in your town plan of conservation and development. I think that's sort of a best practice to at least reference it, if not include some information from your housing plan in your town plan of conservation and development. So a lot of the communities that I've worked with have done that. We have also suggested having this, lead entity plan for quarterly, or again, even annual communications related to what is in your housing plan. Again, there's a lot of good information usually in your plan about your town's housing needs, a lot of good data that could be communicated out to residents on a regular basis, as well as, helping to implement some of the strategies in your plan. And the last thing that we talked about in a lot of the communities was having a town affordable housing fund that can help with plan implementation. And I can talk a little bit about how one of the communities in our region is doing that. But obviously it's nice to have a little bit of a budget, either to push specific developments along, and or, again, if there are zoning recommendations, maybe you need to hire a consultant to work on some of that implementation. So it's nice to have a fund available, and a few of the communities in our region have done that, specifically Salisbury and Washington. Let's see if I can advance my slide here. All right. So I'm just going to talk real quick, just one case study of the town of Salisbury, Connecticut, which happens to be where I live. But in Salisbury, they actually first adopted their plan in 2018, which was one of the first in the state. And the Salisbury Affordable Housing Commission, again, spearheaded creating that plan and implementing it. And they also spearheaded updating it this year, because again, these are 5-year plans. And the Salisbury Affordable Housing Commission also administers the town's Affordable Housing Fund, which, as I mentioned, is a helpful tool to help with seed funding for specific projects that are supported by the housing plan. In Salisbury, we do have a wealth of affordable housing organizations. We actually have 3. The commission is the town organization that supports the Housing Trust and the Housing Committee in our town, which are private nonprofits. the committee does affordable rental housing and the housing trust does affordable homeownership. But it's great to have the Affordable Housing Commission and the town supporting those two nonprofits and the work that they do, so they can do more than they otherwise would be able to. All three organizations are hosted on one website, which I think is nice. So residents can get all of the information about those three groups in one place. And again, the commission, which is spearheading implementation of the plan, holds public forums and information sessions. Again, is tasked with maintaining and updating the plan, and then also really soliciting community feedback and doing that ongoing communications. They have a great newsletter that goes out to the whole community, but we don't have three separate newsletters coming from each of the organizations. The commission does that and shares information for both the nonprofit that does rental housing and the nonprofit that does homeownership. Very quickly, again, the Affordable Housing Fund, which is something that many of our communities are looking into. This is the Town of Salisbury. They adopted this back in 2010, and it has been very helpful. The town allocates funding to this Affordable Housing Fund every year during the annual budgeting process. Typically, it's been budgeting about $25,000 to support the Housing Commission, and then that also can go into this fund that can help the Salisbury Housing Trust or the Salisbury Housing Committee with specific projects, but also, other things that might be, again, consistent with implementing the town's affordable housing plan. So that's been really helpful. And again, it accumulates every year. So $25,000 doesn't sound like a lot. It's a lot for a small town. But over time, we have had, $200,000 in there or more that can be helpful, again, for seed funding for specific developments that are supported by the housing plan. And because of that, we have a lot going on for a small town. The town of Salisbury has less than 4,000 residents, but we have 6 different projects in various stages of both affordable rental and affordable homeownership. These were all specifically named in the housing plan and supported by the housing plan, which is terrific. The housing plan set out a goal of 100 units over 10 years. And a specific number of units for homeownership and for rental. So we have a lot going on. And again, I think a lot of it is, it has been very helpful to have the affordable housing plan, the committee that really implements it. And it has supported all of this, and all the communication that's gone on around a regular communication with residents about the need for it, and each of these projects has really, I think, sped up what we can do, again, in a very small town in a relatively short period of time. Although folks might argue that it hasn't been a short period of time, but we do have a lot going on, and that is how we implement our housing plan in Salisbury. So I'm going to move on to Melissa. Is that good, Melissa?
That's perfect.
And then I'll keep my eye on the chat too.
Great. Thanks, Jocelyn. And I apologize. I'm actually not sick, but I just have some lingering laryngitis. So please bear with me. Apologies for my voice, but I'm really excited to be with you all here today and to talk dig into what Jocelyn was talking about in terms of all the different pieces that are put in place so that you can implement your affordable housing plan. So I'm going to really go deep on the implementation piece. Obviously, the purpose of all the planning is action. And so setting yourselves up really well for that action. And, planners, we say this all the time. And Jocelyn, you already said this, we'll keep saying it. We don't want plans to just sit on a shelf or be something you point to on a table. And if folks haven't seen the planners pointing website, there's a lot of funny pictures, but it's true. We do a lot of that. But, really having that affordable housing plan in place that focuses on implementation activities so we can move that forward. Next slide. Oh, and actually, I should say, sorry, before we go there, the other image on the screen, the Planning for Affordability Guidebook, Jocelyn mentioned my previous role at RPA, working together with the Department of Housing with Mike and his team and the commissioner to really, lay out a lot of the process pieces that Jocelyn talked about, and also the pieces I'm going to talk about here in terms of implementation. So, previous slide, please.
Sorry.
Thank you. Okay, next slide.
Sorry.
Great, thank you. So what are the tools? Moving from talking to actually doing. Affordable housing development, doing what Jocelyn just shared with us in Salisbury, can seem daunting because the planning process is a great opportunity to bring folks together and to get to the point where you've really identified what you want to do next, and then really moving forward. Obviously, that's key. We wouldn't do all this planning if we didn't want to see things happening and moving to creating the housing that we need. So while we all agree that housing is needed, coming up with a concrete set of steps to make it a reality is really, really critical. So what does that look like? Obviously, we need a site. To Jocelyn's point, their plan of Salisbury, selected specific sites to move forward. The zoning for those sites needs to be right. What you want to create, you have to be zoned for. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. Obviously, making the numbers work. Jocelyn touched on the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and we'll talk about a few other tools. No matter what the market, affordable housing is challenging to finance, and so really need to bring together all subsidies and sort of a complex set of sources. So that's going to be a key piece. And part of that is incentives, streamlining the process. So we'll discuss that as well. And lastly, in all of this, as we're creating more affordable housing, thinking about preservation for the long term as well, that, putting these proposals and projects together, how long is that period of time where they will remain affordable, and how can we push that to the greatest extent possible? Next slide. So first, like I said, you need a site. And so the plans, really when you're doing your affordable housing plan, identifying the opportunities, what sites you look around your community, and a lot of communities might include it, say, well, we're built out. There's no room here, but really like taking a deeper look, looking at those underutilized office parks that you might have, strip malls, underutilized publicly owned property, a really critical tool, because if you own the property, if it's in municipal ownership or other public ownership, it's a really great way to write down the cost of development and be able to really, get more deep affordability on a site. Vacant lots, vacant industrial sites, and parking lots close to transit. There's a lot more there once you kind of dig in and start to think hard about, what sites could we really think about for affordable housing. And as I mentioned, reviewing the zoning. So you have your set of sites, and then looking at what's realistic under your current zoning, what can you build? And then what are the opportunities to update zoning so that you can create the housing that you want on the sites that you've identified. Next slide. So again, making the numbers work. I just touched on property owned by the municipality, and being able to, really leverage that is key. So part of that site landscape analysis, I think, focusing on those opportunities. Oop, no, I can't see the slides.
Sorry.
That's okay. I should have it memorized by now anyway. I kind of do, but it's always nice.
I'm sorry. Dawn asked me to change the host, and then now I can't screen share anymore.
I could keep going. I have the slides.
I apologize.
No worries. I have the screen. Sorry.
Maybe Dawn can pass the hosting back to me again.
Oh, actually, I can't drag that across.
All right. Nah, sorry. Here we are. Apologies. Just wanted to make sure everyone was awake.
How could you not be? This is so exciting. I think it's very exciting. But so, really thinking about how we put the deal together. And Mike, I'm sure we'll talk more about this in terms of what programs are available at the state, have on their state financing programs, achieving market feasible thresholds for density. So it's really an important point to think about as you're looking at your sites and you're thinking about what the affordable housing development could look like, to understand the trade-offs. Obviously, there's, a piece of this where density and context are really critical components in kind of figuring out that sweet spot where you can make both work. Other opportunities to think about are local property tax abatements or phase-ins, seed capital for pre-development costs, and that Affordable Housing Trust Fund is really, really critical tool. Jocelyn mentioned it, I'll keep mentioning it too. Seen some really interesting things happen, and there seem to be more and more uptake of that tool. I actually, just a nod to Greenwich, I was doing some hunting around for a few other things and saw a really great website talking about the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, a lot of really cool videos talking about the need for affordable housing, and you can even donate directly through the website to the trust fund. So there's a lot of different resources and ways to get funding into that, into the fund. Next slide. So other incentive tools and these kind of pairing with the straight financing tools, as I mentioned, density is key. So in certain cases, providing a density bonus to create more affordability allows you to get more units overall into the market, but also, really, if you want to lean into that deeper affordability, can help with that bottom line pro forma. Already mentioned the property tax abatements, and then this piece is really key. I'm going to talk a lot more about this in a minute, but the process itself is critical to getting to the point where you actually have the development, getting all the way to the finish line, but also is a key piece in the financing, because if you think about the amount of money that gets spent in the process of going back and forth and how kind of projects that maybe start off looking really beautiful in the original renderings kind of get engineered down. If we can streamline the approvals process, not only does it help us get to an outcome that's more predictable more quickly for all parties, it also, I think, gets us better projects overall. Next slide. So core challenges. So it's both sides of the table, right? Community feels left out of the process very often until it's too late to affect decisions, and developers feel the process takes too long and it's unpredictable, and it's really hard for folks to really enter into this if they're not extremely well resourced with really patient capital. So streamlining the process really is a win-win for everyone. Next slide. So getting to yes, this is the point, right? Be proactive in planning for your future. So having these local affordable housing plans is key, because now all the work is done up front, where we've really worked together as a community to come up with a plan that there is agreement and support for. Local elected officials can feel really confident that what is being proposed is something that's supported by the community, and there's now predictable environment on the development side for what a town actually wants to see. So those projects can be moved forward more quickly and more easily. And then, of course, having clear and predictable timelines so everybody knows what to expect, and that the process is streamlined itself, and that the review is equitable in terms of the trade-offs that we're looking at. I think a really important piece is a lot of development applications, there's such a focus on what are perceived negative consequences, such as traffic or other, types of things like that, where you're really looking on balance. If we're trying to meet a need, a real established need in the community for creating affordable housing, then that really is, needs to be balanced with some of the other concerns that may come up, and so that we can come up with a set of trade-offs that does work for the community. And I think that might be my last one, right? Preservation. So as I mentioned at the top, really important at the outset when projects are being planned, to the greatest extent practical, think about preservation for the long term, because one of the challenges is, as we're trying to create new units, existing affordable units are coming offline because, things are expiring in terms of the affordability protections that are in place for some existing affordable housing. So trying to build those things in from the start is also a really critical piece of this puzzle. And with that, Jocelyn, thank you. I'll turn it over to Mike.
Yeah, did you want to do your poll?
Oh, my poll. Yes. Thank you. I forgot about the poll. Can you run the poll? I don't know how to do that. Thank you.
See, I think so.
Thank you.
Wait. Yeah, here we go.
Thank you. Oh, it's over here. Okay, so my question is, of the tools that I just presented, what one do you think should be the highest priority for your town? What's the greatest need? And I am really curious to see. So please, everyone, participate. All right, thank you. Well, so 70% participation. Thank you very much. So interesting, updating zoning, 48% of folks, focusing on financing, 8%, identifying the sites, 13%, and streamlining the process, 19%. So that's really interesting, right? Because creating the right zoning conditions is really the first step in the process. So it's interesting to see 50% of folks, that's where towns are at. So I think it's really, honestly, imperative and exciting to think that, we have that opportunity to create the zoning that we want on the sites that we want, so that we can see the development that we want. So thank you for participating, and I will now turn it to Mike.
Good afternoon, and Jocelyn, you're going to run it? Okay, fantastic.
Yeah, unless if you wanted to run it, I can.
That's fine by me.
Okay.
Good afternoon. I'm Michael Santorum, the Director of Policy Research and Housing Support at the State of Connecticut Department of Housing. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about what we have available, but I'll tell you a little bit about us first. We are the state's lead agency on housing. We're the lead agency for all housing matters. We provide leadership for all aspects of policy planning related to the development, redevelopment, preservation, maintenance and improvement of housing that serves very low, and moderate income individuals and families. We're also responsible for overseeing compliance with applicable statutes, regulations, financial assistance, etc. And this is the part that I like to say these days. We have money. We want your projects. We want to help you address your municipality's affordable housing needs. We do that through a variety of mechanisms, money being the predominant tool, but also we provide technical assistance associated with the creation, preservation, and compliance of affordable housing. Next. The plans that guide what we do, how we do, are found at the department's websites, and here are just a handful of them. The biggest, most important, and most widely misunderstood is the 5-year Consolidated Plan for Housing and Community Development, or the CON Plan. The CON Plan is supported by 5 individual action plans that breaks down how we will spend specifically our federal formula allocation grants, but at the same time talks about the broader policies of the state of Connecticut and the Department of Housing. There are other administrative plans that support that activity or are specific to specific pots of money. As an example, the CDBG Small Cities Allocation Plan, which I will talk about small cities in a little bit more detail in just a minute. Our administrative plans associated with our both state and federal rental assistance programs. And the last one on the list, our analysis of impediments to fair housing choice, which very soon, pending federal regulation, will be replaced with a new requirement to affirmatively further fair housing. If you're not familiar with the concept of affirmatively furthering fair housing, think about how actions and steps that we can take to prevent discrimination, to address long-term historic segregation, and to move our state forward in terms of housing choice and housing fairness. Next. So how do we do this? Or how do we finance what we do? And that's what this slide really talks about. What are the multifamily programs and initiatives that we currently have underway? The list under the development engagement process are those list of sources or those funds. I'm going to talk a little bit about the development engagement process, or the DEP. Under the current administration, we are working to create an active pipeline of affordable housing projects that will lead to both the creation and preservation of affordable housing opportunities. We do this twice a year in the spring and in the fall through the DEP, or the development engagement process. It's an online portal. Developers, not-for-profits, housing authorities, municipalities can submit under the DEP to tell us about their project. Takes about 35 to 45 minutes to submit. We then, within 2 to 3 weeks, schedule an in-person conversation to talk about your project, talk about how to move your project forward, and provide suggestions on how to get that project moving. We work with the developer to get that project to the point where you are in fact ready for our financing and other potential funding sources through our sister agency, CHFA, or HUD, or conventional financing through a bank or other financial institution. I'm going to say it again. We have money. We want to help you do your projects. So please, we just closed the DEP for the fall. It was November 2nd. So we will be opening up again in March. So now is a perfect time to start thinking about what projects you want to bring to bear, or what projects or activities you want to carry out in your community. Real quick, we also are in the process of launching Build for Connecticut, or Build for CT, what was in the legislature referred to as workforce housing, but what we call middle income housing, where we're serving households between 60 and 120% of the area median income basically your working families. It's people who earn minimum wage or above, and it's intended to help them find stable housing. Finally, and the one I'm going to do a more deep dive on is CDBG, or the Community Development and Preservation Programs. Some of you should already know about CDBG, Small Cities, or the Community Development Block Grant Small Cities Program. It can do a wide variety of activities. And if you go to the next, please, that can help your community. Let's skip right past this one. Go to CDBG. Thank you. Can help your community plan for affordable housing activities, but at the same time, eligible activities include things like public infrastructure, homeowner rehabilitation. It can do some limited economic development, but the vast majority of our CDBG money gets invested in preservation or adaptive reuse of facilities to create new affordable housing opportunities. The key for CDBG is there are about 122 eligible small towns here in the state of Connecticut who can access and request these grant funds. And yes, they are a grant. But historically, we have between 35 and 40 communities that ask for and use the funds. That means there are 80 plus communities that don't know about it or choose not to use it. And our hope is that through the recent activity associated with the municipal affordable housing plans, the communities come to realize there are funds available to help us. We're actually doing this with Jocelyn's group to help her entire region do some planning efforts, and she did a wonderful job talking about current activities that their organization is carrying out. I encourage you, if you are in that part of the state, give Jocelyn a call. Next slide for me, if you would, please. Specific eligible activities that you can do with CDBG: acquisition, public facilities, housing code enforcement, which in a lot of communities, especially our smaller ones, can be difficult. Clearance, rehab, reconstruction, and construction of buildings. Architectural barrier removal, disposition of real property, and you can read the list. The one I want to spend a little bit of time talking about is fourth from the bottom: technical assistance. Your community can actually apply for planning funds to help you to implement your affordable municipal housing plan. It can be used for any of those other eligible activities. It can also pay for consultant services to help you determine how best to address your needs. I do have to reference the list on the left. These are not eligible activities, but they're the only not eligible activities under CDBG. It is a very diverse program, but you can't do new construction, permanent structures. You can't build a governmental building, can't build a new town hall or a new public library or a new public school. You are prohibited from carrying out any political activities with these funds. It is not intended to be income supplementing, so you can't set up a local income supplement program, and it cannot be used predominantly by faith-based organizations for religious-related activities. Otherwise, CDBG is pretty flexible and pretty wide open. Unlike the DEP, which opens twice a year in the spring and in the fall, CDBG is open once a year, and it is highly competitive for those communities that apply. We get about $13 million a year. Planning grants can, I believe, be up to $50,000, depending on specific needs, specific activity. But individual CDBG grants will range upwards of $600,000, potentially more, depending on your municipal needs and the specific activity you intend to carry out. That application process is generally right after the first of the year. it gets announced. We have a developer session where we meet with the municipalities to talk about the application process, what you need to do to apply, what the eligible activities and the priorities are for the coming year. I encourage you, when your municipality receives notice of that session, send somebody, listen, learn about CDBG. It is a grant. It is something your municipality can leverage and something that can benefit you and your community in implementing your local affordable housing plan. Next. So, my poll question, I don't know, Jocelyn, if you have this set up as a poll or not.
Yep, let me get to it here. Here we go.
Here we go. So, has your community applied for CDBG small cities for any eligible activity in the last year, in the last 3 years, in the last 5 years, or to your knowledge, never? And I see the last one, never, growing. And that has been our experience. We're here to help. If you're interested in CDBG, if your town is interested in CDBG, please reach out to us. Give it another 10 seconds or so. And I want to thank you for your participation and interest. And on behalf of the rest of our little panel, we're here for questions. Thank you.
All right. So, I did see something in the chat about sharing the slides, and we're happy to do that. So we can also take any other questions that folks have.
Jocelyn, how would you like folks to, would you like them to put the questions into chat? Is that the
Either
best
way,
thing?
I think in the chat is fine. You know, if people do want to raise their hands, that's okay too.
Okay.
So thorough, no questions at all.
We answered all the questions that they had about housing plan implementation.
Well, I mean, I'll just comment, you know, just since we're all here together. I mean, I think honestly, it does feel like from where I'm sitting that we're at a point in the process where we know what to do, right? We just need to do it. We know we need the local affordable housing plans. Most towns have done them. We know we need to identify sites. Won't go back through my presentation, but we know what the tools are. DOH, CHAFA, there is money out there, these affordable housing trust funds. So we just have to all do it now, right? Which is kind of exciting. We're not really at that point we were 5 years ago, where I think a lot of us were just talking about how we're even going to think about moving this forward. So, you know, I would say that signals some progress. I don't know.
Yeah,
So
and
pick on you or Jocelyn.
I'll
or
add
Mike,
too, from what I've seen, sometimes towns are implementing various strategies in their housing plan, but they're not necessarily recognizing that they're in the housing plan. So I think the other nice thing about, you know, having that annual meeting or even the annual report that goes to your board of selectmen or your city council to say what you're doing with the housing plan, you just, you know, can pat yourself on the back for what you have done to implement the plan. And again, that just helps when you are asking people to participate in a housing plan update. It's nice to be able to report that you did something with the last one. And if you have those annual reports, you can sort of point to, you know, how you did that.
One last thing I'll throw out as well. A lot of time, effort, energy went into the creation of your local municipal affordable housing plans. As both Jocelyn and Melissa have said, worst thing would be if it just sat on a shelf and didn't get used. I encourage you, use that plan, identify what your community needs, get a group of committed local individuals and make it happen. Make it happen for you, for your community, for your families. Because this is what it's really about. It's about how can you help you in your community meet its own needs. We don't want to have to tell you. We don't want to tell you what to do, how to do it. We want to help you do what you want to do and what you need to do.
So Mike, there's a question in the chat about how they find out the towns that qualify for CDBG grants.
Simple enough if I unmute myself. So there are 122, I believe, eligible small towns. Any community with a population under 50,000 is eligible for CDBG small cities. There are about 22 communities, give or take, that are what are called entitlements. They get a direct CDBG allocation from HUD, U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. Everybody else is eligible to apply through us. If you go to our website, and under programs, you can click on the link for Small Cities Community Development Block Grant. The list of eligible towns is there. But if you have a population under 50,000, chances are your community is eligible.
Well, and I'll note, in terms of housing plan implementation assistance, as Mike said, if you are in my region in the Litchfield County, I'm happy to help you. We do have a Center for Housing Opportunity for Fairfield County, and that covers Eastern Connecticut as well. So feel free to reach out to us as well for some assistance in helping to implement your town's housing plan.
Thank you, Phyllis. Phyllis actually posted the link in the chat.
Terrific.
And yes, the city of New Haven gets their own CDBG allocation. So don't let that dissuade you. Understand the eligible activities for CDBG isn't any different at the municipal level, the entitlements, than it is for us. So your city, in this case, New Haven, every year has to create a plan for how they intend to spend their CDBG money. You want to find out how much they get and what are they spending it on, and how you, for your organization, can access some of those funds.
All right. Well, I don't want to keep people if there aren't any more questions. I don't know. Is Sean still here? Should we give people 10 minutes of their life back?
Could do that.
Yeah,
Although
Sean
I'll
had
just
to
jump
leave
in
to
sorry.
for
Into
another session. There were a couple more questions. One of them was regarding a list of current towns that receive CBDG funding. Is there that was one of the questions, and
Absolutely. For information on the current CDBG awards, again, if you go to the department's website, look at the link that Felicia Adams was very kind to post. You'll find at that page the current report on current activity. It actually, you can get a lot of our prior activity through what are called our performance evaluation reports, or our PER, which are also available at the department's website. You can see who's gotten it over time, what current active projects are out there and underway, and there are a lot of them right now. I would say at the moment, there are roughly 80 active CDBG projects out there, a wide variety of types of activities, but the vast majority are housing preservation related activities.
I see the question from Anita.
okay.
And I'll ask Melissa if she has any ideas.
What's the question?
There's
Oh,
been
here.
a town leadership change and a question about if you're bringing a draft housing plan or housing plan to a new leadership in town, if there's a way of doing that.
It's interesting. I'll say that's where I'm at locally. I also volunteer where I live on this on affordable housing with the local affordable housing committee. We had the same thing happen in the election, so I can speak professionally and personally on that. I think it's always a challenge, right? I think one of the initial questions obviously is where we think everyone is in terms of their interest or support for affordable housing, full stop. If you have folks, who have come into office who are generally friendly to the topic of affordable housing, obviously that makes it easier. At the same time, it's still not their plan per se necessarily if it was developed under the previous administration. So I'd say under that scenario, it's probably a little bit of an easier lift if you spend some time just reaching out, sitting down, going over the plan and being open to, you know, the input and feedback from a new administration so that they can kind of wrap their arms around what was previously done. And to the extent they were or were not involved in that, can take some ownership of it and then move it together forward. That's sort of better case scenario. Worst case scenario, you know, you have a new administration that comes in that really isn't there and doesn't really feel, you know, that they are promoting or supporting affordable housing. Obviously, that's a much heavier lift and a bigger challenge. In that case, I still would do the same thing, you know, come and sit down with folks. But I think to the extent that there is support locally amongst a group, an organization, a coalition, whatever group of residents, maybe do a little more on that part of it and bring that group together to also talk to the new administration. So it's kind of more of a coalition effort potentially. So really, I think depends, but there's always going to be some work in those transitions and it's always a challenge. And, you know, I think the good news is hopefully where we're at as a state across the board, it does feel like we're there, that we all agree that we need more affordable housing in our communities, and most communities are embracing the idea that we need to figure out how we're going to do it. So hopefully it's not as heavy of a lift as it would have been, like I said, 5 or more years ago. But I think, you know, in all of this work, it requires patience. We all know that. We have to be very, very patient and methodical and persistent and, you know, and just keep at it. But I think, you know, not going into it assuming the worst, and really trying to, you know, set a process in place that helps a new administration get there.
One other thing I'd like to add, we don't just need affordable housing. We need housing of all types, all sizes, all income bands. We have a housing stock crisis here in the state of Connecticut. We simply need more units. We need more units for our elderly. We need more units to rent. We need more single family ownership, at least in the starter home area or income range. As you build those opportunities, then it frees up, if you will, other opportunities in other areas. We need to match what we have with what we need. And the best way to do that is to create supply.
Mike, there was one more question here in the chat that I had this question myself, actually. If you were going to use CDBG to implement your town's housing plan, so to do, planning type activities, is there still a requirement that a town employee be certified in the small cities CDBG administration?
To apply for the funds. The short answer is yes, but it's not a heavy lift. And we do that training twice a year. And the intent is the CDBG funds come with a fairly significant federal reporting obligation. And what we've run into in the past is communities apply for it and don't provide municipal staff to support the receipt of the funds. And then the money just sits there. So we created this opportunity to make sure that municipalities have someone on staff who's trained to understand what the real federal obligations for taking this money are. Not that they can't then go out and hire a consultant to do the majority of the activity, but we know that they have someone at the municipal level who's going to ensure that they're meeting their federal obligations.
And it's an 8-hour training or something, a 6-hour.
It's about 6 hours.
Training.
That's correct. Yeah. Again, it's one day. We do it twice a year.
And it does have to be a town employee.
We are looking for it to be a town employee. The consultants that are out there doing all the work know the process and understand the rules. The place where we see the disconnect, or have seen the disconnect in the past, has been municipality doesn't really understand its obligations, because we and the federal government aren't looking at the consultant. We're looking at the municipality because they are the grantee. Right. So the idea is make sure that the town knows what it's getting into, knows what its federal obligations are when they take these funds.
Okay. Thank you.
And I just see another question in the chat. Is it legal to build affordable housing that prioritizes municipal employees? The short answer is it is not illegal to build affordable housing where it prioritizes municipal employees. There's a way to do it. You cannot discriminate, i.e., you can't prevent anyone else from applying who is also eligible to live there. But there are actual programs out there that are targeted for specific kinds of municipal employees. So, for example, there's a first responder program, there's a teacher program, there's one more and it's slipping my mind. If you
These are
take a
CHAFA
look
programs.
at,
Mike?
that's correct. If you go to the CHFA website or the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority website, there are specific statutory programs, pilots, where they can help your developers build units which are prioritized, not exclusively for those population groups.
All right. Well, I think it's about that time. I just want to thank Melissa and Mike for your time today, and for all of you who attended this session. We hope you're all have lots of success in implementing your town's housing plan, and reach out to us if you'd like some support or guidance. So thanks everybody.
Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.